The ghosting hour. My parents died when I was 10. It was an awful, awful crash. My grandmother lived in northern Maine. After their funeral, I took a Greyhound to Belfast. She was my only living relative. The coot was always talking about the ghosting hour. She was a coot, wasn't she? That winter, her shriveled hands shook me from a dream one morning. We crept outside. Fresh, feathery snow silently draped over everything. It was death quiet. Young morning light wrapped the world omnipresently, filling everything with a gray glow, even the air in front of my frost-red nose. She spoke in a grave, flat voice. The ghosting hour is here, when the spirits dance. Not day, nor night. Not dark, nor light. Not black, nor white. The barrier is loosened now. Their corpses thicken in the mist. From over the hill, a shadow approached. A human shadow. Shadows on the frozen lake began to solidify, swirling figures with missing arms and legs. A macabre melody could be heard while round the cabin a shadow man danced. He twirled his severed head in step. They looked as they did in death, mangled, mashed, and decayed, while all around jolly corpses frolicked in the unholy light. I screamed and hid in the lone cabin. Seldom did I exit that winter. I went to school, to therapy, to college. I wed and had children, and we moved to Florida. I never told anyone about the ghosting hour. I buried it deep as the Maine winter snow. It was all just a dream, some fuzzy vestige of childhood, some rotten soup and a fever. But last week, we visited my wife's family in Colorado. Needles of white nipped at my feet. I had sleepwalked, still in my pajamas, into the street, into one of those uncanny mornings where an abstract of white and gray swallowed me, without my glasses, without landmarks. Deafening silence split with a low hum, a song I knew. Mother played it in the mornings. Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Warbled far away and all around. Mom? Dad? The shadowy figures were unmistakable. They approached, knees buckled like toothpicks under my frozen weight. Their silent steps, nothing the snow. A foot from my nose were perfect Stygian outlines of my parents, standing, smiling, arms outreached. They were my joyous parents, exactly as I remembered them. Father was strong and tall. Mother was kind and warm. Memories rose like snowflakes, unfrozen. What was that warning Grandma kept giving? The spirits of the dead are not the only things that dance in the ghosting hour. My parents died in an awful, awful crash. There wasn't a scratch on these things. Where are you? I wake alone in darkness. What happened? Where am I? The torrent of questions is interrupted by a jolt of pain and the discovery of rebar piercing my abdomen, right about where my liver should be. I'm dying. What happened? We were on location, filming the latest episode of our web series on paranormal investigation. It was myself, along with my partner, our research specialist, and a tech guy. The investigation was proving fruitless up until I asked our researcher about the first murders that had happened on site. She must not have heard me, I remember thinking. I called her name, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had silently been cut while we joked about camera-shy ghosts. Blood soaked her orange sweater. I didn't even have time to comprehend the situation when I heard my co-star scream from upstairs. How had she made her way up there in such a short time? I blindly ran towards the stairs, but jumping to skip the first few steps was met with a fall and tumble down into the basement. I'm questioning how I ended up on the wrong staircase while the rats squirm around me and the pool of blood becomes more noticeable. My last moments of consciousness aren't physically painful, but tormenting nonetheless. At least one of my friends is dead, and I can still hear Daphne's tortured cries coming from above. This is all my fault. I never should have founded Mystery, Inc. Somebody call an ambulance, but not for me. I first smelled the scent of blood around noon. The wind brought the distinct smell of rust from behind a nearby tree, a smell so strong I could almost taste it. Did my wife notice? No. She was still prepping our s'mores without a care in the world. Good. We had been planning our camping trip for weeks, but after the local TV stations bombarded our town with news of a serial killer on the loose, we almost canceled our mini vacation. My wife was particularly scared of bumping into the serial killer here. But what are the odds of running into the serial killer at a state park 20 minutes outside of town? I reassured her that we would be okay and dragged her on the trip. She picked at her fingernails the entire way over, but now she seemed more at ease. We settled our tent in the camping designated area of the park and started up a fire. Soon after, I detected the smell of blood. I tried to look in the direction of the smell with my peripheral vision, but it was difficult to make out shapes out of the corner of my eye. Still, behind a large tree, about some 20 feet away, a man was poking his head out to look at me and my wife. I detected a hint of the color red around his waist area and a small glint in his face. Glasses? I pretended not to see him and continued talking with my wife and chomping down a s'more. I could see constant movement in the corner of my eye. The man was slowly moving from tree to tree, getting closer and closer to our tent. The closer he got, the more distinct he became. I could see his denim overalls splattered with dark red blood. I could even see him adjusting his glasses. At times, I would accidentally face in his general direction, and he would freeze in place. Still, for the sake of my wife, I pretended not to see him. I'm not a religious person by any means, but at that time, I prayed and prayed that this man would have a change of heart. Please, God, make him leave. Eventually, the smell of blood faded. We were in the clear. But the smell returned at night, and it was much stronger than before. When the man finally decided to barge into our tent, he was wielding a knife. His arms were soaked in fresh blood. My instinct kicked in, and I transformed. My arms and legs swelled up and ripped through my clothes. Fangs tore out of my gums, and claws grew out from under my fingernails. My body became covered in dark fur. I tore the poor sucker into pieces. When the light in his eyes finally went dark, and he stopped screaming, I realized my wife was huddled against a corner of the tent. Her trembling hands were holding the serial killer's knife, pointing it at me. The railroad. It lay there, old and abandoned, a disused pathway to another place. No one was really sure how long it had been there, just that it had been there since their grandparents were children, and their grandparents before them. Sometimes children would come and play here, safe in the knowledge that the only thing that ever crossed these rickety old wooden tracks were the feet of children, knowing that never again would a train travel the fractured wooden boards that signaled another era. The adults always had warned the children never to go to the old railroad, although they never explained exactly why. The adults looked scared and stern, but not enough to dissuade the children from secretly creeping through the trees to the tracks, to play in the dark tree-covered area of the forest that the railroad called home. One day, when they were old enough, the children would be told why those tracks were abandoned and what had happened there. They would be shouldered with the responsibility of making sure those tracks stayed complete but abandoned, left to feed the abundance of trees around them. But not yet. Not right now. All they could hope for was for their children to listen and stay away, for their children never to see the ghostly figure of the old man who guarded the tracks all those years ago, and even now returns every now and then to make sure the tracks stay abandoned and desolate. The adults were doing their job, and woe betide them if they ever found these tracks being used ever again, because the pain that would cause to everyone involved would be indescribable. We all saw them both. This is a story about the only time I've looked directly at a ghost. And it wasn't just me. My whole immediate family saw them too. When I was 13 years old, my dad was getting married to my stepmom. Her side of the family owned a fishing cabin in the mountains in very northern Washington state. It was her grandfather's, and it stayed in the family. This cabin was in the middle of nowhere. I'm not kidding. The nearest town was tiny, like population less than 100. You have to drive up into the mountains on a dirt road for about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the cabin. It sat just above a small lake, very beautiful and secluded. No other cabins around, nothing, just the one. I had never been to a place like it before or since. So I'm 13. My soon-to-be stepbrother is 10. My soon-to-be stepsister is 5. And my stepmom was pregnant with my half-sister. My dad and stepmom decided they wanted to have a very small wedding at the cabin. So we drove up to it the day before the ceremony. Everybody else who was attending would be arriving the next day, the day of the wedding, except for my stepmom's youngest brother and his girlfriend. We'll call them James and Vicky. They were also arriving the same day as us, as we had planned to light fireworks and celebrate the night before. So another thing about this cabin, there's no television, no radio, no phones, only electricity and water. This also took place in the late 90s, when most people had pagers, if anything. Definitely not cell phones. So, we were at the cabin and decided to take the small rowboat out to fish for our dinner. It's dusk at this time. I remember I kept looking back up at the cabin to see if James and Vicky had arrived, because they were in their early 20s and young and fun, and all of us kids were really excited for them to get there. So my family and I are sitting in the boat, and I turn my head to look at the cabin again. This time, I see a woman standing on the patio, facing us. She's wearing a long white gown. It looks to be made of lace. It goes up over her neck, like an old-fashioned dress looks. Her hair is up. She is waving at us. The only thing I can't make out are the features of her face. There is a man standing next to her, but he's turning to walk around the side of the cabin. He has a cowboy hat on and a Sherpa-lined leather coat. I got so excited I said, "Look, James and Vicky are here." My whole family looked up at the cabin and exclaimed, "They are here." My dad rode us in fast. We ran up the short hill to the patio where they had just been standing. Nobody was there. No car in the drive next to ours. No note. No sign that anybody has even been there. It was really weird. We all felt strange. My parents distracted us somehow, and soon we forgot because of the excitement of the wedding. The next day, guests are arriving, including James and Vicky. They said, "Sorry we didn't make it last night. We broke down on the way and didn't have the ability to call you because there are no phones here." It was no big deal. We were just glad they made it. Fast forward to 6 months after the wedding. It's Christmas dinner, and James is over. Suddenly, the experience dawns on me for the first time since it happened. All I said was, "Hey, Mom." I call my stepmom Mom. "Remember that time we were at the cabin, and we thought we saw James and Vicky, but it wasn't them?" James immediately interrupts me and says very seriously, "One time Vicky and I were at the cabin fishing. It was around sunset, and I looked up at the patio to see a woman standing in a white dress, waving at us." Everybody at the table got very quiet. Then he mentioned the man in the cowboy hat and seeing him walking around the cabin a time or two. He and my mom got emotional and deduced that the man and woman must be their grandpa and his first wife. I haven't been to that cabin since then, though I wish I had. I get goosebumps every time I tell that story. I can still see them in my mind, clear as day. Mimics. When the aliens landed, they looked just like us. Every TV channel showed beautiful men and women walking down ramps from their saucers. Thousands of ships landed all over the planet. Wherever they landed, the man and woman looked like the local population. They didn't speak, but communicated to us through handheld computers and other electronic devices. They opened their noiseless mouths, and text appeared on a nearby device. They told us that they had been watching for thousands of years and had learned to mimic everything but our speech. Only perfect physical mimicry allowed us to learn of your different cultures, the aliens would repeat. Please, show us how you watched us from so far away, pleaded our leaders at the sight of the New York saucer. The alien duo walked back into the saucer that landed in Times Square. Several moments passed, and they returned smiling and carrying a reflective panel. As they stopped at the end of the ramp, a message flashed across all of the billboards at once. You call them mirrors.